The air in the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years always tasted of dust and a faint, sweet decay. It clung to my tongue, a familiar residue of generations of quiet devotion. Today it was thicker, heavier, pressing in on me as I traced the worn stone of the nave. Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass, painted shifting mosaics on the flagstone saints and martyrs frozen in their eternal, silent agony. I felt a kinship with their stillness, their resigned suffering. My own grief was a dull ache, a phantom limb I still expected to feel. Sarah, her absence was a hollow space, a vacuum that the echoing hymns of my childhood could never fill. I ran a hand over the rough-hewn pew, the wood polished smooth by centuries of kneeling. My father's hands had smoothed this same grain, his father's before him. They'd spoken of faith, of solace. I'd spoken of nebulae, of gravitational waves. Our worlds, once so distant, had eventually converged, a collision I hadn't anticipated. Now only the silence remained. My study, crammed into the old vestry, was a sanctuary of a different kind. Books, stacked precariously, threatened to spill onto the floor. Star charts, yellowed with age, were tacked to the plaster walls, their constellations a stark contrast to the Gothic arches above. The scent of old paper and dried ink was a comfort, a tangible link to the intellectual pursuits that had once consumed me. Before Sarah, before the quiet unraveling of my own universe. It was late. The town outside had long since surrendered to sleep, its streetlights casting pale, indifferent pools of light against the ancient stone of the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years. Only the faint hum of the old fluorescent tubes in the vestry disturbed the profound stillness. The data streamed in, a relentless flood of numbers and spectral lines from the deep space array. It was my escape, my obsession, but something was different tonight. A whisper in the data, a subtle dissonance that pricked at my scientific mind. It wasn't a glitch. I'd run diagnostics a dozen times. It was too consistent, too pervasive. A pattern, too intricate to be random, too alien to be anything I recognized. It began as a faint anomaly in the cosmic microwave background radiation, a ripple in the universal static. Then it appeared in the spectral analysis of distant quasars, a signature woven into the very fabric of space-time. I leaned closer, my breath misting the cool glass of the monitor. The lines of code scrolled by, a language I understood intimately, yet this was a dialect I'd never encountered. It spoke of immense scale, of time scales that dwarfed human history into a fleeting blink. It hinted at a complexity that made my own equations feel like child scribbles. My fingers, usually so sure on the keyboard, fumbled slightly. A tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of a profound, unnerving awe. The data wasn't just reporting observations, it was implying something else. A deliberate arrangement. A message, perhaps, or something far more abstract. I'd spent my life searching for order in the chaos, for the elegant laws that governed the universe. Now, I felt as if I'd stumbled upon a hidden symphony, a conductor whose existence I had never dared to imagine. My heart, which I'd thought a dead weight in my chest for so long, began to beat with a strange, insistent rhythm. Not the frantic pounding of panic, but a steady, powerful thrumming. It was the sound of my intellect reawakening, of a curiosity that had been buried under layers of grief. This anomaly wasn't just data. It was a question posed by the universe itself, a question that demanded an answer. I magnified a section of the spectral data. There, nestled within the familiar emissions of hydrogen and helium, was something else, a series of sharp, impossibly narrow peaks. They didn't correspond to any known element, any known atomic transition. They were too precise, too defined. It was like finding a perfectly formed crystal in a pile of sand. A prickling sensation crawled across my skin. The dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light seemed to hold a new, unsettling significance. Were they merely particles, or were they caught in some unseen current? I shook my head, dismissing the fanciful thought. It was the late hour, the intense focus, but the feeling persisted, a growing certainty that I was no longer alone in my intellectual pursuit. The vast, empty canvas of space was not so empty after all. It was teeming with a consciousness so ancient, so profound, that it defied all my understanding. And this consciousness, this intelligence, was not merely an observer. The subtle shifts, the intricate patterns, they were not passive reflections, they were actions. My gaze drifted to the faded photograph on my desk, Sarah laughing, her eyes bright with a life that was now a memory. A wave of longing washed over me, sharp and sudden. I was looking for answers in the stars, but the most profound mystery remained here in the quiet, empty space beside me. Yet even as the familiar ache returned, a new, unsettling thought began to take root. What if the universe in its unfathomable depths was not only aware of my grief, but was somehow responding to it. What if the anomalies I was seeing were not merely cosmic curiosities, but something far more personal, far more terrifying? The spectral peaks pulsed on the screen like a silent, alien heartbeat. Sunlight fractured through the stained glass, painted grotesque, shifting patterns on the flagstones, a kaleidoscope of ruby and emerald that usually soothed me. Not today. Today they felt like the eyes of something vast and indifferent watching. I had come here seeking solace, a connection to the quiet certainty that had once grounded me. My wife, Alina, would have understood. She found peace in these hushed aisles, in the scent of beeswax and old paper. Now the silence was a gaping wound, echoing with her absence. The data, the impossible readings from the observatory, had been a distraction, a frantic burrowing into the abstract to escape the visceral ache in my chest. But the numbers, they had followed me. They whispered in the corners of my mind, a siren song of cosmic madness. I ran my fingers over the cool, smooth surface of a pew worn to a sheen by centuries of kneeling. Generations had sat here, their hopes and fears absorbed into the very wood. I tried to conjure their faith, their quiet acceptance of the universe's grand design. But my own design felt shattered, the pieces scattered by a force I couldn't name. It had started subtly, a flicker in the background radiation, a harmonic resonance where none should exist. Then a series of discrete energy bursts, too structured to be natural, too complex to be artificial, at least by any human definition. I dismissed them at first. Equipment malfunction, solar flares, cosmic rays, anything but what my gut screamed they were. I'd cross-referenced with every known celestial phenomenon, every theoretical model. Nothing fit. The anomaly was an impossible stain on the fabric of space-time, a glitch in the divine algorithm. I walked towards the altar, the dust motes dancing in the slanted light. The worn hymnal lay open on the lectern, a page I'd seen 1,000 times, its familiar Latin script a comforting anchor. But as I drew closer, a faint shimmer caught my eye, emanating from the wall behind the altar, where a massive, dark wooden crucifix hung, its Christ figure weathered and serene. It was a distortion like heat haze rising from asphalt on a summer day, but here in the cool, stone interior of the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years, it was utterly alien. My breath hitched. I squinted, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a consequence of my overtired eyes. But the shimmer intensified, coalescing, forming a distinct, almost geometric pattern against the dark wood. It pulsed, a silent internal rhythm that I felt more than saw, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones. It was the same signature as the data. The impossible data. My hands trembled as I reached into my coat pocket, fumbling for my phone. The screen flared to life, its bright light jarring in the dim sanctuary. I opened the spectral analysis application, my fingers clumsy. I pointed the camera towards the wall. The phone's display flickered, then stabilized, overlaying the real world with a grid of incomprehensible symbols and fluctuating waveforms. The anomaly was registering. It was there. A low hum began to emanate from the wall, a sound so deep it seemed to originate from the earth itself, a resonant frequency that set my teeth on edge. I backed away, my heart racing. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. The abstract had bled into the tangible, a violation of everything I understood about the universe. The data wasn't just numbers on a screen anymore. It was a phenomenon, a presence. And it was here in the most sacred space I knew, a space that had once represented unwavering truth. The shimmering intensified, the geometric pattern resolving into something more complex, a lattice of impossible angles that seemed to fold in on itself. The hum deepened, a guttural thrum that vibrated through the stone floor up my legs into my very core. My vision swam. The familiar contours of the church seemed to warp, to stretch, as if reality itself were being pulled taut. What was happening? Was this some elaborate prank? Some unprecedented atmospheric event? Or was this the first tangible manifestation of the anomaly I had been chasing, a ghost in the machine of the cosmos, now manifesting in the heart of my own history? The crucifix, bathed in the otherworldly light, seemed to twist, its serene expression contorting into something I couldn't bear to look at. I could feel my sanity fraying, the edges of my perception blurring. Was this the beginning of the end, or just the end of my understanding? Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass, painted shifting mosaics of ruby and sapphire across the flagstones, but offered no warmth. My fingers, chilled despite the late spring air outside, ghosted over the cool, rough surface of a baptismal font, its basin dry and hollow. I'd retreated here as I often did, seeking a silence that the sterile hum of my apartment and the endless mocking chatter of my colleagues couldn't provide. The universe, vast and indifferent, had always been my solace. The data, I spread my notes across a pew, the cheap paper rustling like dry leaves. The anomaly, as I'd begun to call it, wasn't a single event, but a cascade. A ripple that started in the faint microwave background radiation and propagated outward, subtly altering gravitational constants, nudging stellar formation into improbable configurations. It was too precise, too intentional. My eyes scanned the equations, the spectral analyses, the faint, almost imperceptible deviations in cosmic microwave background maps. I'd spent weeks cross-referencing, running simulations, searching for a natural explanation. A rogue black hole, a previously unknown stellar phenomenon, even a glitch in the observatory's instrumentation. But each avenue led to a dead end, a more complex absurdity. The deviations weren't random, they were orchestrated. I remembered the night I first saw it, not on a screen but etched in my mind, a phantom image born from the raw data stream. A series of faint, interwoven filaments, impossibly thin, stretching across vast intergalactic distances. They pulsed with a light that wasn't light, a resonance that vibrated on a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel in my bones. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so, like finding a flawless diamond at the bottom of a cesspool. The church was silent, save for the distant chirping of birds and the occasional creak of the old timbers. I focused on a single point of data. A series of energy spikes detected in the Perseus cluster, seemingly random, yet occurring in a sequence that mimicked a complex fractal. I'd spent the last 48 hours without sleep, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing obsession. My hands trembled as I reached for my tablet, the screen's glare harsh in the dim light. I overlaid the cluster data with a set of astronomical charts I'd pulled from the archives, charts detailing the movement of celestial bodies over millennia. There. A faint, almost imperceptible correlation. The energy spikes weren't random. They corresponded to specific alignments, to moments when certain galaxies across unfathomable gulfs of space passed through particular gravitational nodes. It was as if something was using the universe's own architecture. My breath hitched. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a tool, a cosmic mechanism. But for what purpose? I zoomed in on the spectral signature of the energy spikes. It was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Not the signature of any known element, not the decay of any particle. It was a resonance, a hum that spoke of immense power held in check, channeled. I began to trace the filaments I'd seen in my mind's eye, following their improbable paths across the universe. They weren't static. They shifted, coalesced, reformed. The filaments weren't merely in the universe. They were part of it, woven into its very fabric. They were the threads, and the universe was the tapestry. And then, I saw it, a convergence. The filaments originating from a region of space far beyond our observable horizon were all subtly, inexorably drawing towards a specific point. A point that, when projected forward in time, would intersect with our solar system. Not immediately, but within a timescale that was terrifyingly, undeniably. Soon, the sweet scent of decay in the church suddenly felt suffocating. I looked up at the towering, arched ceiling, the vaulted stone seeming to press down. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was watchful. I felt an immense pressure, not of air, but of presence. Something ancient, something vast had noticed my prying eyes. I closed my eyes, trying to banish the image of those pulsing filaments. But they were seared behind my eyelids. The universe was not empty. It was not governed by blind chance. It was a stage, and I had just glimpsed the playwright. And the play, it seemed, was about to reach its climax. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the tablet. I had to go back. I had to see if I had missed something. There was this convergence, a natural consequence of these cosmic threads, or was it a deliberate act? And if it was deliberate, what was its target? Was it Earth? Was it me? The dust in the air seemed to swirl, coalescing into shapes that weren't there. The faint scent of decay sharpened, taking on a metallic tang. I stood abruptly, the movement jarring in the sacred quiet. My chair scraped loudly against the stone floor, the sound echoing unnervingly. I had to get back to my lab. I had to look at the data again. But as I turned to leave, a shadow fell across my notes, a shadow that didn't correspond to any window or pillar. It was impossibly deep, impossibly still. And it felt hungry. Had I truly seen a convergence, or had I merely glimpsed the edge of something that was already here? Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass, painted shifting mosaics on the flagstones, a silent testament to the passage of centuries. I hadn't been here in years, not since Alina. The weight of her absence was a physical thing, a cold knot in my gut that the familiar scent of incense and aged would usually soothed, but today only amplified. I'd come seeking refuge, a moment's respite from the gnawing unease that had settled over me like a shroud. the cosmic data, the impossible patterns, the whispers in the static they had followed me here into this sanctuary. I'd brought a battered leather satchel, its contents a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that now consumed my thoughts. Inside, nestled amongst printouts of spectral anomalies and my own feverish scribbles, was a small, tarnished silver locket, Eleanor's. I'd fiddled with it endlessly, the smooth metal cool against my skin. My fingers tracing the cool, unyielding stone of a baptismal font, brushed against something embedded within the grout. A small, metallic glint. Curious, I worked my fingernail around it, dislodging a tiny disc no larger than a thumbnail. It was intricately etched, a pattern of concentric circles and sharp, angular lines that seemed to writhe under my gaze. It felt ancient, alien, yet strangely familiar. I turned it over. On the reverse, a symbol I recognized with a jolt that sent a tremor through my arm. It was the same glyph that had appeared repeatedly in the anomalous data, a sigil that had haunted my dreams. I pocketed the disc, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The familiar scent of decay suddenly seemed less benign, more watchful. I moved deeper into the church, towards the crypt. My ancestors were buried here, their names etched into granite slabs, their stories whispered in the hushed tones of familial lore. Row upon row, a silent testament to a lineage I was now beginning to doubt. There was this quiet faith, this earthly continuity, all there was, or had my ancestors too been touched by something beyond their comprehension? I found the niche I was looking for, a simple stone tablet bearing the name of a distant relative, a missionary to some forgotten land. The tablet was slightly askew. I pushed against it, the stone grinding with a sound that echoed unnervingly in the confined space. It gave way, revealing a small cavity behind. My breath hitched. Inside, not bones, but a small wooden box. It was old, warped by time and moisture, but remarkably intact. My hands trembled as I lifted it. It was heavier than it looked. I pried open the lid. The contents were not what I expected. No relics, no personal effects. Instead, a series of thin, metallic plates stacked neatly. They were cool, impossibly smooth, and emitted a faint, almost imperceptible hum when I held them. Each plate was covered in the same swirling, angular script that adorned the disc I'd found earlier. And then I saw it. On the first plate, beneath a cascade of alien characters, was a small, stylized depiction. A star. Not just any star, but a specific constellation, one I recognized from my astronomical charts. It was a constellation that had been the focus of a major anomaly in the cosmic data, a region of space that had baffled me for weeks. This one bore a different celestial map, a different arrangement of stars, but the same unsettling script. And beneath it, another depiction. A planet. A world I knew. It was Mars, and etched beside it, a series of symbols that, with a sickening lurch, I recognized as a crude representation of a primitive civilization. My hands shook violently now, the metallic plates clattering against each other. I fumbled for the third plate. This one showed a gas giant, its swirling atmosphere rendered with uncanny detail. Then the fourth, a binary star system, each plate a record, a history, not of human endeavors but of something else, something ancient, something that had visited, observed, cataloged worlds across unimaginable distances, and on each plate the same signature, the same glyph. This wasn't just data, this was proof that I was not alone in my discoveries, proof that this vast, indifferent cosmos was not empty, it was inhabited, and the inhabitant, it was ancient, it was patient, and it was here. The faint hum of the plates seemed to grow louder, resonating not just in my hands, but in the very marrow of my bones. The sweet decay of the church air suddenly felt like the exhalation of a slumbering titan. Had this entity left these records deliberately? Or had I, in my pursuit of the anomalous, stumbled upon something I was never meant to see? Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass, cast bruised hues of ruby and amethyst across the flagstones. I ran my fingers over the cold, smooth surface, searching for a truth that felt as distant as the stars I once charted. My wife, Eleanor, had loved this place. She'd found solace in its enduring silence, its echoes of faith. Now, it felt like a tomb. The data, though the impossible data streaming from the Kepler archives, it didn't speak of solace. It spoke of an immense, calculating presence. For weeks, I'd been wrestling with it, poring over the spectral analyses, the gravitational wave signatures that defied every known physical law. It was like finding a symphony in the static, a coherent pattern emerging from the cosmic background noise, a pattern that hummed with intelligence. I'd isolated the anomaly to a region near the Cygnus constellation, a place I'd spent countless nights gazing at through my telescope. It wasn't just a flicker, a statistical blip. It was a deliberate, intricate signal pulsing with a rhythm that felt expectant. I'd cross-referenced it with every astronomical catalog, every recorded stellar event. Nothing. It was as if a new star had been born, not of fusion, but of intent. My laptop, a sleek, modern intrusion into this ancient space, glowed with the intricate diagrams. Lines of code, complex algorithms I'd written and rewritten until my eyes burned, filled the screen. They were my attempts to understand, to quantify the unquantifiable. Each successful computation, each piece of the puzzle that snapped into place only deepened the unease. This wasn't just an observation of the universe, it was an interaction. The anomaly was shaping reality, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness. Gravitational lenses bent in impossible ways, light curves that twisted and contorted as if being actively manipulated. I remembered Aliner's laugh, the way it used to fill rooms. Now silence was my constant companion, broken only by the hum of the servers in my makeshift lab in the church's crypt, a place I'd reinforced and climate-controlled, a stark contrast to the crumbling stone above. It was there, amidst the damp, earthy smell, that the true horror began to bloom. I'd been working on a predictive model, trying to anticipate the anomaly's next move. And then I saw it. A convergence, not just a random alignment of celestial bodies, but a precise, timed arrangement that would occur in precisely 3 weeks. A rare planetary alignment, yes, but the anomaly's signature was not a passive observer of this event. It was amplifying it. The gravitational forces, the energetic emissions, they were being focused, directed. My breath hitched. The hairs on my arms prickled. This was no accident. This was preparation. The entity, whatever it was using the alignment as a conduit, a focal point for something vast and terrifying. I zoomed in on the stellar cartography, the pinpoint locations of planets and stars, their predictable orbits now seeming like a carefully orchestrated dance. The specific configuration, its rarity, had always been a point of fascination for astronomers. But now, in the context of the anomaly, it felt like a key being turned in a lock. The energy readings spiked. A wave of something, not light, not radiation, but a pure raw power was building. My hands trembled, blurring the crisp lines on the screen. I could feel it, a pressure in my chest, a tightening in my throat. This wasn't just about distant galaxies or abstract cosmic phenomena. It was about here. It was about now. The anomaly's signature was intensifying, its pulses growing stronger, more insistent. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment of convergence. I traced the projected path of the celestial bodies, their slow, inexorable march towards the appointed hour. What was being opened? What was being invited? The dust in the air seemed to swirl, to coalesce, forming shapes just beyond the periphery of my vision. But the sensation lingered, a phantom touch on my skin. I stared at the screen, at the date circled in red, 3 weeks away. The anomaly wasn't just influencing the universe. It was actively shaping it for this specific event. Was this a prelude? A grand unveiling, or something far worse, something that would shatter the very fabric of existence? Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass, painted shifting mosaics of ruby and sapphire across the flagstones, but the warmth felt alien, a mockery of the chill seeping into my bones. I had brought the printouts here, a desperate hope that the sanctity of this place, the weight of its history, might lend credence to the impossible. I found the bishop in his study, a room that smelled of old paper and beeswax. He was a man of meticulous routine, his white hair combed with an almost surgical precision. He sat behind a heavy oak desk, his hands clasped before him, his expression one of polite, weary expectation. I laid the papers out, the stark, alien patterns of the cosmic data stark against the antique wood. "My Eminence," I began, my voice raspy, unused to speaking such truths aloud. I've found something that changes everything we understand." He picked up a sheet, his brow furrowed. The ink of my hastily scribbled annotations seemed to bleed into the sterile scientific notation. "Astrophysics, Thomas. I thought I was here about the parish ledger." His tone was gentle, but the underlying dismissal was clear. "It's not just physics, sir. It's a language, a communication from something vast, something that's been shaping things subtly for millennia." I pointed to a sequence, a cascade of primes that pulsed with an unnatural regularity. "This isn't random, it's a signature, a conscious hand." He set the paper down, his gaze drifting to a framed portrait of a stern-faced ancestor. "Thomas, I've been through a great deal. My wife, her passing." He trailed off, his eyes filled with a familiar, unhelpful sympathy. "This isn't grief, sir, this is real. Look at the periodicity. The correlations with deep space radio bursts that were dismissed as noise. This entity, it's not just out there, it's here. It's influencing us. It has been for a very, very long time. My hands trembled as I gestured, the printouts rustling like dry leaves. I showed him the temporal anomalies, the way the data seemed to bend time itself, hinting at a cosmic architecture far beyond our perception. He sighed, a soft exhalation of air that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of dogma. The universe is a grand and mysterious place, Thomas, but it operates on divine principles, not alien whispers. Pushed the papers back towards me, his movements deliberate. Perhaps I should take some time, rest. It wasn't just his disbelief, but the way he framed it, as if my findings were a symptom, a delusion born of sorrow. I tried the cathedral's archivist, a woman known for her sharp intellect and even sharper tongue. I found her meticulously cataloging ancient manuscripts, the air around her thick with the scent of parchment and preservation chemicals. The patterns, I pleaded, spreading the data across her polished mahogany table next to a delicate illuminated Bible. They align with ancient prophecies, with celestial events described in the oldest texts. It's a convergence, a recognition. She peered at the sheets through her spectacles, her lips pursed. These look like calculations, Thomas, complex, certainly, but hardly evidence of, what did I call it, an interstellar consciousness. She tapped a section with a long, slender finger. This is merely mathematics extrapolated, fascinating, yes, but not divine revelation. But the implications, I insisted, my voice rising, the way it's been subtly nudging our development, our very thoughts. It's like a gardener tending a single insignificant plant. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing. Thomas, I speak of forces beyond our understanding, yet I present me with numbers. Numbers are the tools of men, not gods, or, as I suggest, extraterrestrial intelligences. Her tone was not unkind, but it was final. I suggest I speak with the dean. He has a more pragmatic mind for these matters. The dean, a man whose faith was as solid and unyielding as the church's foundations, listened with a benevolent frown. He spoke of faith, of the divine mystery, of the limitations of human knowledge. He spoke of the need for humility in the face of God's creation, but he did not speak of the impossible patterns in the data. Thomas, he said, his voice a low rumble, my passion is admirable, but sometimes the search for meaning can lead us down. The universe is God's, and he reveals what he wills in his time. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a physical weight pressing me down. Perhaps I need to reconnect with the simpler truths, with prayer. Each dismissal was a stone added to the wall building around me. The dust in the church felt heavier now, the sweet decay more pronounced. Was I to be the only one to see the storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that threatened to erase everything? The weight of the silence in the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years pressed in on me. It was a familiar weight, one I'd carried since Aliner's passing, but now it was laced with something else, something sharp and cold. The stained glass windows, usually sources of muted, comforting light, seemed to warp the afternoon sun into sickly, unnatural hues. Red bled into bruised purple, and a sickly green pulsed where gold should have been. I traced the worn wood of the pew, the grain familiar beneath my fingertips, yet it felt alien, as if the very matter of this sacred space had begun to shift. The data continued to stream, a flood of impossible numbers and cascading waveforms. Each new anomaly was a confirmation, a grotesque punctuation mark in the silent scream of the universe. It wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a deliberate, intricate weaving, a tapestry of influence unfurling across unimaginable distances. And the thread, the singular blinding point of focus, was Earth, my Earth, Aliner's Earth. A tremor ran through the stone floor, subtle at first, like a distant train. But this was no train. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't place, ozone perhaps, mixed with something like damp, ancient earth. It was the smell of a storm brewing, not in the sky, but within the foundations of reality. My breath hitched. This was it, the point of no return. They weren't in my ears, not truly. They were a resonance, a vibration deep within my bones, a chorus of foreign thoughts seeping into my own. They spoke of cycles, of cosmic tides, of entities that existed outside the comforting constraints of time and space. They spoke of us. The light filtering through the stained glass intensified, not in brightness but in its quality. It became viscous, like honey pooling on the flagstones. The air crackled, a low hum that vibrated in my teeth. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling, at the intricate carvings of angels and saints, figures of faith that now seemed utterly insignificant, pathetic in their limited scope. They were like children's drawings trying to depict the more of an ancient god. A wave of nausea washed over me. The world seemed to tilt, the familiar angles of the church warping. The pews, the altar, the pulpit, they were no longer solid, immutable objects. They wavered, their edges blurring as if the very concept of their form was being questioned. They were not words, not as I understood them, but a symphony of primal urges, of vast, indifferent consciousness. They spoke of recalibration, of restructuring. The data on my tablet was no longer just numbers. It was a translation, a clumsy human attempt to grasp the language of the architect of entropy. I had to do something. The feeling of helplessness, the crushing isolation, was a physical ache. But beneath it, a spark of defiance ignited. Alina would never have. He would have found a way. She always did. My gaze fell upon the ancient lectern, the one that had held the family Bible for centuries. Now the carvings seemed to writhe, the figures shifting in my peripheral vision. I remembered a passage, a fragment of a sermon Alina had delivered years ago, about the power of resonance, about the echoes of intent that could linger in sacred spaces. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble born of utter despair. But what else was left? I scrambled to my feet, my legs feeling heavy, as if wading through molasses. The floor beneath me pulsed with a faint, rhythmic thrum. I reached the lectern, my hands trembling as I grasped the rough wood. The scent of ozone and damp earth was overpowering now. The stained glass light swirled, no longer just colors but shifting patterns, geometric impossibilities that made my head spin. The very air seemed to vibrate with an unseen force, pressing in on me, on everything. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the overwhelming sensory assault. I focused on Alina. Her smile, the warmth of her hand in mine, the quiet strength that had always anchored me. I dredged up every memory, every ounce of love, every shred of defiance I possessed. And then I began to speak. Did it do anything? Could it possibly do anything against a force that reshaped galaxies? The very structure of the church seemed to groan, not from age, but from an external pressure. Was this the end? Or just the beginning of something far worse? The air in the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years tasted of dust and something else, something metallic. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant, unwelcome reminder. The hushed reverence that usually filled these stone walls was gone, replaced by a brittle stillness. My own breathing sounded like a bellows in the vast emptiness. I ran a hand over the cold, polished wood of the lectern. It felt alien, as if it had been carved from a different tree, in a different age. Outside, the sky had shifted. I'd noticed it before, a subtle wrongness, but now it was undeniable. The usual pale blue had leached away, leaving a bruised, sickly yellow that seeped into everything. The light itself felt filtered, as if it had passed through something vast and indifferent, something that had scrubbed all the vibrancy from the world. I looked at my hands. They seemed thinner, the lines on my palms deeper, like cracks in parched earth. Were they always this way? Or had the world's decay somehow etched itself onto me? The stained glass windows, those familiar narratives of saints and martyrs, seemed to writhe. The figures within them were no longer static. Their eyes, once fixed in eternal devotion, now darted, their painted lips parting in silent, impossible screams. Alina's window, the one depicting her as a gentle shepherdess, was the worst. The lamb at her feet had turned its head, its woolly fleece rippling as if disturbed by an unseen wind. Its eyes, black and polished, seemed to stare directly at me, and I felt a prickle crawl up my spine. It was a look of profound, ancient knowledge, a knowledge I had glimpsed in the data, in the whispers of the cosmos. I turned away, my gaze falling upon the altar. The crucifix, usually a stark symbol of sacrifice, now appeared, distorted. The wood seemed to swell and recede as if breathing. The figure of Christ, once rendered with human suffering, now possessed an unnerving stillness, a perfection that was not of this world. The smooth, unblemished skin, the serene, unseeing eyes, it was an idol, a placeholder for something far older, far more terrible. I could feel it radiating from the altar, a silent, pervasive hum that vibrated in my teeth. I remembered the calculations, the impossible equations that had confirmed my fears. They weren't just describing a phenomenon, they were describing a presence, a consciousness that existed on scales so immense, so alien, that our universe was merely a canvas for its unfathomable designs. And it had noticed us. It had noticed me. The data had been a signal, a beacon, and I, in my grief and my desperate search for meaning, had answered. My breath hitched. It was like the rustle of dry leaves, but there were no leaves inside. I strained my ears, my heart a dull thud against my ribs. It came again, closer this time. A dry, scraping sound, as if something were dragging itself across the flagstones. I forced myself to look. A shape indistinct at first, then resolving into something that defied logic. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It moved with a disjointed grace that was deeply unsettling. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified. My hands trembled, a faint tremor that I tried to still by clenching them into fists. I could feel the rough weave of my jacket against my palms, a grounding sensation in a world that was rapidly losing its familiar anchors. I took a step back, my boot scuffing against the stone. The scraping stopped. Then a sound that was not a sound. It was a pressure, a weight that settled on my mind, a low thrumming that resonated not in my ears but directly in my skull. It felt like being submerged in an ocean of static. The air grew heavy, thick, difficult to draw into my lungs. I could feel my own thoughts fragmenting, scattering like startled birds. The certainty I had clung to, the grim resolve, began to fray. What was this place? It was the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years, but it was also not. The stone felt wrong, the geometry subtly warped. The very air seemed to hum with an alien resonance. It was waiting. Had it always been here, hidden within the fabric of this sacred space? Or had it arrived with the shift, a consequence of my unintended communication? The yellow light outside bled through the stained glass, painting the floor in ghastly hues, and I wondered if the world I had known was truly gone. My breath hitched, a sharp, painful intake of that coppery air. The heavy oak door of the church where my family has been clergy for 400 years creaked shut behind me, its sound a mournful sigh swallowed by the cavernous space. Light, what little there was, struggled through the stained glass windows, casting fractured, grotesque patterns across the flagstone floor. They writhed, these colors, like trapped things. My own bee. It felt like a foreign object, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I had come here seeking sanctuary, a place of old certainties. But the certainty I found was far more unsettling than any doubt. The metallic tang in the air wasn't just dust. It was the echo of something vast and alien, something that had seeped into the very stones, into the air, into me. The cosmic hum I'd detected in the data, the subtle discord in the universe's song, it wasn't distant. It was here, now. I ran a hand over the worn, carved pew in front of me. The wood was cool, almost slick, and I imagined all the hands that had rested here before mine. Generations of faith, of whispered prayers, of quiet contemplation. Now it felt like a stage set for something else entirely. The silence pressed in thick and suffocating. I had to know, to this hushed ancient place. It felt like the focal point, the nexus. The anomaly wasn't in the data streams, it was in reality itself, and this church, this sacred ground, was somehow permeable. My eyes traced the intricate carvings on the pulpit. They depicted scenes I knew by heart, biblical stories, saints, angels. But now my mind saw them differently. The halos seemed to warp, the serene faces contorted by an unseen force. The very air seemed to vibrate, a low thrumming that I felt more in my bones than heard. It was the sound of the universe rearranging itself, of old rules being rewritten. I walked towards the altar, my footsteps unnervingly loud. The altar cloth, a deep crimson, seemed to pulse faintly. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched it. It was rough, woven with threads that felt strangely coarse, like spun wire. Beneath my fingertips, I felt a faint warmth, an unnatural heat that had no business being there. It was as if the cloth itself was alive, or perhaps a conduit. The light from a particularly vibrant blue pane of glass fell across the altar. It wasn't the gentle glow of sunlight. It was a searing, unnatural blue, and where it touched the stone seemed to shimmer, to shift. It was like looking through water, but the water was made of pure thought, of an alien will. My mind reeled. This wasn't a hallucination. It was a revelation. It was in here. It had found a way, or perhaps it had always been here, a dormant seed waiting for the right conditions to bloom. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling. The stone arches soared upwards, seemingly solid, eternal. But I knew better now. The solidity was an illusion. Everything I thought I knew about the universe, about existence, was a fragile construct, a thin veneer over something immeasurably ancient and terrifyingly powerful. The metallic taste intensified, coating my tongue. My vision swam, the edges of my sight blurring as if the very air was becoming less distinct. It was the echo of that cosmic hum, now amplified, a symphony of alien thought. My wife. Her memory, once a source of solace, now felt like a phantom limb, a painful ache. Had she sensed this? Had she known, in her own way, that the universe was not what it seemed? I had seen the truth. I couldn't unsee it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, to push back against the encroaching presence. The voices, if they could be called voices, were not in my ears, but in my skull. They were not words, but concepts, impressions, vast and overwhelming. They spoke of cycles, of ebb and flow, of realities that bloomed and withered like cosmic flowers. And Earth, our fragile little planet, was just a particularly vibrant blossom, ripe for assimilation. My body felt heavy, rooted to the spot. But I couldn't move. It was as if the very fabric of my being was being rewoven, my atoms rearranged to fit a new, incomprehensible pattern. The metallic tang was now a pervasive scent like ozone after a storm, but a storm that had never broken, a storm of pure, raw consciousness. The light from the stained glass intensified, the blue becoming a blinding white. The carvings on the pulpit seemed to writhe with a life of their own, their ancient forms twisting into impossible shapes. This was it. The resolution, not an end but a transformation. The universe was not a passive stage, it was an active, sentient entity, and it was claiming its own. My role in this new cosmic order was not as an observer, but as a participant. A single, insignificant note in its grand, terrifying symphony. It was not malice, not good or evil, but a fundamental difference in being, a hunger for uniformity, for a universe that reflected its own singular, alien mind. And I, Thomas, a mere speck of stardust, was now irrevocably a part of it. The church where my family has been clergy for 400 years was no longer a sanctuary. It was a gateway, and the door had just swung wide open. What would become of me now that the universe had my full attention?